If you were to say who the best duelist in North America is, a few names come to mind, but in the 2025 season, my answer would be Aditya Darab. Aditya has had a quicker rise to prominence than almost all modern pro players, going from his first recorded regional top in August of 2023 to winning the NAWCQ in July of 2024, and was a game away from becoming the first back-to-back Nats champion a year later. Despite his many accolades, there was one thing on his bucket list that he had yet to do.
Yeah, I have top 4 at Houston and Providence.
But you've never top 2, correct?
I've seen the finals once or twice.
NAWCQs, yes. YCS, this would be a big deal for you to actually make a push and win a YCS.
The date is November 9th, 2025, and Aditya has traveled across the country and climbed his way to the semifinals of YCS Pittsburgh. Over the course of the weekend, he's won 14 matches and lost only 1, an incredible record all things considered. However, he's probably felt better about his upcoming best of 3 because across the table is the only person who's defeated him all tournament, Mutasim Malik. Here, in front of thousands of viewers, they're about to debate who should be given the opportunity to be a champion through the language of a mirror match. While the Draco Tail mirror has a lot of opportunities for skill expression, looking at the opening hands, Aditya's chances of winning are dubious. He's going second, and in standby, he activates a Mulcharmi Fuolos to discourage his opponent from setting up. It is negated by Mutasim's Ash Blossom. Mutasim then begins his main phase with a Ketu Draco Tail to search Draco Tail Lucaeus, which he normal summons and activates the effect to search. While he does a good job of hiding it, Aditya is in a very desperate position here. His hand contains only one more card that can stop his opponent, his own Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Draco Tail is known for its ability to punch through boards going second, but Aditya's prospects are looking grim. The rest of his hand contains a Draco Tail Urgula, Pan, and Rahu. Pan and Urgula are powerful cards, but they are high-level monsters, and it can only be used in combination with a card that fusion summons, like Rahu. Rahu won't work though, because it is almost guaranteed to be negated if Mutasim is able to pop off, either by the Ash Blossom he can recycle from the grave, or through Draco Tail Flame, a trap card which can negate spell cards that he can set. Aditya is forced to use his own Ash Blossom to negate Lucaeus and pray that it's enough, and this time it isn't. Mutasim has Draco Tail 5 mana in hand already, and is able to use it to perform a fusion summon to start his combo. He ends on the full Draco Tail board of all 3 traps, including Flame, 2 extra deck monsters, and 5 mana in hand, giving himself the ability to fusion summon on Aditya's turn on top of all of his other interactions. Aditya starts his turn and is blessed with a Destiny draw, a Draco Tail 5 mana of his own. His awkward hand has had its potential unlocked, but he is still confronted with the uphill battle of defusing Mutasim's field. Since Rahu is checked by Flame, he activates his 5 mana first, fusing Pan and Urgula together to summon Arthalion in defense position. Defense position is very important here, because Aditya is playing around Mutasim's Draco Tail Horn. This trap can return an attack position monster from the field to the hand and draw a card, but by placing Arthalion in defense, there isn't a good target for it. Aditya then builds a chain of his trigger effects, Chainlink 1 Arthalion to add back 5 mana and Ash Blossom from his graveyard, and Chainlink 2 and 3 for Pan and Urgula to destroy cards on Mutasim's field and set Draco Tail spells or traps from the deck. Mutasim decides to activate his singular mystery back row, a set copy of Draco Tail Sting to banish Aditya's 5 mana and prevent its recursion. Mutasim also uses Gulamel to destroy Aditya's Arthalion, so he can get value out of it in case it is popped by Pan. This 5-link chain resolves. The set copy of Flame is destroyed, no longer checking Aditya's spell cards, and he is fully in the driver's seat. If you've been paying attention, you might notice something odd here. Aditya has monsters in attack position. In fact, every monster he summons for the rest of the turn is in attack position as he lines up his field for an attack. But Horn is still on board, he never destroyed it. Remember like a minute ago when I said all this stuff about how correct it was to put his fusion monster in defense? In the span of 2 chains resolving, the situation has changed completely. Aditya added back his Ash Blossom to hand, which can be used to negate cards that draw cards, including Dracotail Horn.
And speaking of this trap, here comes the separate horn.
Target.
This is gonna be huge to get the
The
Secretary of
Ash
Grand.
Blossom, though, it was still in hand, so it's going to stop a dead cold in the Trex because it does include the effect to draw a card.
Now, we know we can play around Dracotail Horn by putting monsters in defense. We saw Aditya do it. A question you could potentially ask here is this. Why even give Mutasim a chance to activate the card by playing into it and putting your monsters in attack? Isn't it a bit of a waste? This might seem strange since everyone knows you have to attack to win, but hear me out. Theoretically, Aditya could continue summoning all of his monsters in defense to completely deny the value of Horn. It's common knowledge that Ash Blossom is a very important card in the Dracotail matchup because it can negate spell cards like Rahu and Ketu, and these are the deck's most powerful cards. Aditya could save it for a more impactful card than Horn. He could summon all of his monsters in defense, wait a turn or two, cycle the Urgula back to his hand, and use it to destroy the Horn before it gets rid of anything important, instead of committing so hard to the field. Obviously, he doesn't do that, and it's because that would be a mistake. In order to understand, we must know the macro level goals of the Dracotail strategy. Dracotail was released in Justice Hunters alongside 2 other meta-relevant decks, and probably puts up some of the weakest fields of the 3, but it does have a couple of important advantages to compensate. A major one is that it can play on the first turn of the duel courtesy of Dracotail Phimena, regardless of who goes first. It also has very powerful options to rip apart opposing fields as we saw Aditya leverage. However, the last advantage it has is inevitability. This is the idea that if a game goes long and both players burn through their deck's resources, the strategy with inevitability will come out on top. What this means in practice is that the engine has the ability to easily recycle its cards. While we've already said that the Dracotail spells are very powerful, the traps do something much less flashy. Aside from the disruption they put up, they shuffle Dracotail cards that have been used back into the deck and draw a card. From these 3 traps springs the inevitability of the deck, since as long as they resolve, you can continue to play the game. Between Arthalion fishing cards out of the graveyard and the trap's recycling ability, you can play the Dracotail engine far longer than the other engines, and thus the longer a game goes for, the more Dracotail is favored. If Dracotail gets to play, it is inevitable. Hopping back into our game, we can see right here that Aditya has a distinct advantage. Mutasim's shields are down, and outside of Horn and Phimena, he has very little left available to him in terms of disruption. Aditya opts to use Ash to apply pressure because taking the game into a grind can only give Mutasim a slight opportunity to build up his resources again. Playing this way breaks Mutasim's ability to shuffle back his own traps, since none of them have gotten the chance to recycle the others, and eliminates all of his monsters that could potentially serve as material or force out Aditya's disruptions. Even though he hasn't been defeated, Mutasim from this point lacks a win condition and is forced to concede the game. In the finals, Aditya goes on to take a well-earned win in his first YCS trophy. In-game decision-making in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is without a doubt one of the most complex yet crucial aspects of succeeding at a high level. Decisions often ask players to weigh a bunch of competing factors from various axes of the game against each other, and determine which are the most important in a given game state. Let's take both another look at this match and a page out of Mark the Page's book by using everyone's favorite game theory idea, the payoff matrix. When Aditya summons his first Arthalion, he has to make the decision about whether to put it in attack or defense position. This box will represent the outcome of Arthalion in defense, and this box will represent the outcome of Arthalion in attack. If Arthalion goes in defense, Mutasim isn't able to use Horn on it, so it's ultimately going to stick on the field. If it's in attack position, however, Mutasim can return it to the extra deck with Horn. Therefore, the outcome is no Arthalion for Aditya, no Horn for Mutasim, and Mutasim draws a card. We can compare these two outcomes using the basic metric of card advantage. Defense position is a net 0 for Aditya, whereas attack position has the potential to be a -1. If we compare the value from both options, this decision is very easy. Let's compare this to Aditya's next summon, the Secretarian Dragon. If it's summoned in defense like before, Mutasim can't use his Horn, and Aditya saves his Ash for later, a net 0 in card advantage for this interaction. Putting Secretarian in attack position, however, gives Mutasim the ability to use his Horn, which Aditya is essentially forced to negate with Ash Blossom. This is also a net 0 in card advantage, so we can't rely on it to determine which option is better. Here, we are forced to compare other factors about the game state that happen as a result of this decision. From what we went over earlier, we know that because of the grind game of Dracotail, attacking and putting pressure on Mutasim is what Aditya valued over having his Ash Blossom in hand, and that having Ash Blossom to give Aditya the opportunity to exact that pressure is what makes this choice preferable compared to the earlier scenario. If you play chess, you might be familiar with the phrase, "the threat is stronger than the execution." Chess is full of these hidden consequences of moves where just the acts of occupying a column with a rook or pointing an attack at a knight that the queen is cowering behind are enough to cut off options from your opponent, or force an unproductive response. This can generate value, even if these moves don't directly result in a capture. The phrase is credited to Aaron Nimzovich, one of the strongest chess players in the early 20th century, and there is a story that goes along with it.
The threat is stronger than the execution. And do you know where that comes from?
No.
Emanuel Lasker chomped on during the games and he smoked the most foul-smelling cigars this side of Cuba. It was really, really bad. It reeked at the playing hall. So all of the participants in one of these major tournaments dug into their pockets and they bought for Emanuel Lasker the finest cigars they could find. And Emanuel was very, very grateful, and he came the next day with the awful smelling cigars and put them on his table. And Nimzovich ran to the arbiter and said, "Arbiter, look at these cigars but he's not even smoking them." "Yes, but the threat is stronger than the execution," complained Nimzovich. And in this case, you got to give the guy credit. That was brilliant. That was a great quip.
There is no real need for you to know this, I just thought it was interesting. In Yu-Gi-Oh, when your opponent has a disruption and you're deciding how to play into it, you have to determine which is more valuable to them, the threat or the execution. There are many instances where playing around a card is a bad choice due to the other factors about the game state, like the grind game of Dracotail. It might feel like an intelligent choice to respect your opponent's cards, but it can be actively detrimental to your results if you do it at the wrong time. In this excellent video by Jesse Cotton, highly recommend you watch it, he goes over how Dracotail Horn pretty much has a hidden effect when people have too much respect for it.
It's interesting because this Dracotail Horn has this implicit ability that as long as it's there and your opponent either knows it's there or expects it's there, they're going to be summoning monsters in defense mode. At least they should be. It essentially acts as a level limit area B as long as it's face down. When your end goal for your deck is to stay alive, a level limit area B, an attack floodgate, actually does the job pretty well.
As a Yu-Gi-Oh player, when you are sizing up your opponent's disruptions, you must determine if the threat or the execution is more important to your opponent, and make your decisions accordingly. Dracotail Horn is the box of smelly cigars on the table, creating value purely through what it has the potential to do. To give an example that Jesse might not be so fond of, the inherent risk-reward of this idea is very easy to see when looking at combo spreadsheets. It's pretty common for spreadsheets to have a safer line that plays around a hand trap if you think the execution is more valuable, and a greedier line that plays into it for a stronger end board if you think the threat is more valuable. Because I'm behind, I have a Malice spreadsheet from Alliance Insight format in 2025. This was monetized, these combos are top secret, you all gotta promise you're not gonna tell anyone. There are 2 lines listed for the 1-card Malice and Underground combo. One option commits Wizard at Ignister much earlier, meaning at this point in the combo you could lose all of these bodies to Nibiru. However, as a reward, you end on triple co-linked Firewall Dragon, which can return up to 3 monsters from the field and graveyard to the hand, allowing you to remove your opponent's cards and recycle your own. The alternative line does not give your opponent nearly as good of a Nibiru, but forgoes Firewall as cost. The decision of which line to do is an example of risk-reward that we could model in our payoff matrix. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might notice that the last example we've looked at has kind of departed a bit from playing around Dracotail Horn. At the Pittsburgh semifinals, Dracotail Horn was known. It was public information when Mutasim set it off of Fimena's effect on turn 1. This is very different from deciding whether or not to play around a hand trap like Nibiru in a Malice deck, since there is no telling if your opponent will have it or not, usually. So, mathematically, when should we put our opponent on Better Have It? Well, to start with, there are many situations where playing around a card has no notable downsides, like activating Dimensional Fissure before packs to play around Droll and Lockbird. Eric. Putting those scenarios aside, to model these situations, we have to adjust our payoff matrix by adding a second axis. This one will represent whether or not your opponent has a certain card you could play around. It's worth noting that these 2 rows have a variable likelihood of occurring that is not necessarily equal. To use the basic example of Nibiru, if we know our opponent is playing 3 copies in a 40 card deck, we can calculate that they have a roughly 1 in 3 chance of drawing it in their opener. From there, we can make a quadrant to represent the results of each situation. Playing around Nibiru when they have it, playing around Nibiru when they don't have it, playing into Nibiru when they have it, and playing into Nibiru when they don't have it. There currently isn't a great model for turning an end board into a number to evaluate how strong it is, but if there was, you could determine which choice is better through a weighted average. It falls to the duelist's skills to evaluate which option is optimal, with the knowledge that regardless of which side you choose, you get the top outcome 2/3 of the time and the bottom outcome 1/3 of the time. However, to complicate it even further, this 1 in 3 chance of drawing Nibiru isn't universally applicable. If you've watched my video on bluffing, you know that there are ways you can gather information to better assess what your opponent might have. The most basic of this information is paying attention to the game state. If my opponent searches a copy of Nibiru, the chance of them having Nibiru jumps from 33% to 100%. You knew that, and our payoff matrix looks like the one from earlier with Dracotail Horn. There's a variety of other factors that can change this percentage more incrementally. For example, if our opponent is playing Dracotail and we know they're playing Nibiru, and the month is March of 2026 while I was researching for this essay, I might expect them to see it 1 out of every 4 games. In March, 2 Nibiru was a common ratio to play in the main deck of Dracotail. This type of thing is both a skill you can hone and a method of tournament preparation. By closely paying attention to your opponent, the game, and the format, you can more accurately assess the possible outcomes and their expected values to guide your in-game decisions to more preferred outcomes. We've already explored that looking at card advantage and your opponent's win condition are important factors when making a decision. However, there are a number of corner cases that I wanted to look at to round out this essay. One important factor when looking at whether or not to play around a card is which player is currently at an advantage. We saw in the match between Aditya and Mutasim that when Aditya was ahead, he was willing to trade his Ash Blossom 1 for 1 with Mutasim's Dracotail Horn. When you are at a distinct advantage to your opponent, you can afford to make weaker plays to play around specific cards of theirs that might get them back in the game. Let's look at a more extreme example from the quarterfinals of 2025 Worlds. Rosalie Thorkildsen is piloting Sky Striker against Isaias Estrada, who is on Crystron K9. Rosalie is playing a build of Sky Striker without any hand traps, which counters the K9 engine. K9 17 Izuna is one of Isaiah's most powerful cards, able to set up a rank 5 Xyz on either player's turn if Rosalie activates a monster effect in hand or grave. Isaiah's hand is subpar, and he ends on a notably weak board that Rosalie totally dismantles through the use of his Cyber Dragon Infinity as material for contact fusion.
Oh, it's Mega Fleet!
Wow.
And a Book of Eclipse. Though she can't kill him, she attempts to pass the turn back to him in a commanding position with 5 set spell traps and a Sky Striker Ace Shizuku. Before going to the end phase, Isaiah opts to destroy her Shizuku with Crystron Cluster to prevent Shizuku's end of turn search effect. Rosalie has the opportunity to salvage the damage by activating the grave effect of Sky Striker Ace Ray, which can summon itself from the graveyard when an opponent destroys a Sky Striker Ace Link monster. It's pretty much free advantage. However, she opts not to.
Wait, can you not bring back Ray? Maybe she just doesn't want it.
This right here is a really heads up play. If Rosalie activates Ray, she could turn on Isaiah's potential Izuna, which could eventually lead to an untargetable Zeus wiping her field through the help of Lupus. Rosalie doesn't know if Isaiah has Izuna, but she has a bunch of disruptions on board and an alternative way to a follow-up Sky Striker Link in the form of Linkage. Because of Isaiah's weak board turn 1, Rosalie is in such a winning position that she can easily afford to let Ray go to ensure she doesn't have to deal with the potential danger of Izuna in Isaiah's hand. However, if Rosalie was very behind here, like maybe she has 4 fewer cards in the back row, activating Ray very well could be the only path to victory for her. In that scenario, it makes far less sense to play around Izuna because even if Isaiah has it, she probably will still lose regardless. When making decisions, these are the sorts of ideas you should consider in your own mental payoff matrices. Another important thing to keep in mind when deciding to play into a card is the effect of the card you're playing around. In this stream clip from December, Jesse Cotton commits what we know to be a cardinal sin in the Draco Tail mirror.
Why'd I put this in attack mode? Not the brightest. Not the brightest. Fuck, that's so stupid. Alright, well, we're on attack mode now.
Jesse recognizes that he has already played into Horn, but if he puts the rest of his monsters in defense, his opponent will just be gaining additional value out of it. The initial play was obviously a mistake, but to not commit to attack position would be an even greater mistake when he can put some pressure on his opponent. After his error, playing into Horn is the optimal play here, because the Horn is single target removal, and summoning in defense position would just give his opponent added value to the threat that is already going to be executed upon. Even good players can make mistakes. Jesse shows his skill by adjusting properly, and is still able to walk with the game. However, this decision changes completely depending on the effect of the card you're playing into. Let's look back at Nibiru. A common way to deal with it is to threaten to summon a monster that can negate Nibiru to essentially force your opponent to use it or lose it, and then continue to play after. However, unlike single target removal like Horn, summoning 5 monsters into Nib does not necessarily mean you should summon even more without forcing it out, because it will just make things worse. Like we saw with the Malice combos, and unlike in Jesse's game, committing more cards into Nibiru will just mean losing more resources when it finally comes down. When players are playing around each other's cards properly, a funny quirk can occur: checking. A check is a card that counters another important card, and thus must be saved for that card specifically. K9-17 Ripper can negate monster effects that activate in the hand or graveyard, and is often made early in the turn to check cards like Nibiru and Droll and Lockbird. Checks are a way that cards can generate value purely through the threat that they pose, since as long as Ripper is on the field and isn't negated, the opponent's Nibiru is effectively useless. Occasionally, 2 cards can even check each other, leading to a bit of a stalemate. Let's take a look at an example from a game I played at my locals. I have opened a sideboarded copy of Kesh'Tira Fenrir, a copy of Dracotail Flame, and the rest of my plays on my turn have been stopped by my opponent's hand traps. My opponent is on Vanquished Soul K9 and is now forced to play with a smaller hand with few attributes due to the hand traps he's used. My opponent has a copy of Vanquished Soul Caesar Valius in hand, and leads with a normal summon of Vanquished Soul Dr. Madlove, activating its effect on summon to search a Vanquished Soul spell or trap. Caesar Valius has the ability to special summon itself as a quick effect by targeting and returning a Vanquished Soul monster on the field to the hand. What this means in practice is that if I ever use the Fenrir effect to banish my opponent's Madlove face down, my opponent can dodge it by chaining Caesar Valius, and Caesar has enough attack points to destroy Fenrir by battle. Caesar is thus a check to Fenrir. However, it also goes the other way. If my opponent ever proactively tries to summon Caesar Valius, they've activated a monster effect, and my Fenrir can trigger to banish it face down. This means that Fenrir is also a check to Caesar. Here is how the turn played out. I decide to hold my Fenrir effect off of the read that my opponent opened Heavy Borger or Caesar, since playing into either card would be a very bad outcome for me. My opponent searches and plays Vanquished Soul Start, which I negate with Dracotail Flame, links off into Rock, and has to pass the turn doing nothing. We were both unable to get value out of our cards purely because the player who committed first was put at a massive disadvantage due to their opponent's potential counterplay. Recognizing the proper time to use cards proactively versus reactively is a significant part of proper technical play in Yu-Gi-Oh! And something that I would love to go more into depth on in a future video. The value cards can generate simply by existing is not limited to in-game plays, but all choices made regarding the game, even outside of the duel. When I was going over the Sky Striker Crystron game at Worlds, one thing I did not really dwell on is the fact that Rosalie is playing Sky Striker at Worlds. That's crazy, right? When you're thinking of strong Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks in 2025, you think of Dracotail, you think of Yummy, you think of Malice, and you definitely think of Vanquished Soul, the deck she played to get her Worlds invite in the first place. Striker is not one of these. Rosalie's deck is anti-meta, built specifically to chew through the boards of decks she expected to play against. In our earlier example, Rosalie did not activate her Ray effect engraved to avoid dealing with Izuna because Ray and Rose are the only cards in her deck that can trigger it. She played 0 hand traps in her main deck. As can be seen from her record going into semifinals, it went pretty well.
So this deck is built on the premise that blind I am going second. But it's also built in a way where, like, if I know my opponent is playing a deck that is not Dracotail or Yummy, which I was expecting to be the most popular decks, I want to go first.
Her deck is built to hard counter the decks in the room through the use of aggressive going second options like Triple Tactics, Thrust, and Raigeki, but in the semis she is paired against a matchup she is not prepared for. Lunalight, piloted by Tom Kleingräber. There's like an umlaut in there somewhere, I think. Lunalight is known for its main win condition that strikes fear into the heart of many a duelist. Lunalight Liger Dancer. 3800 attack. Quick effect. Destroy all of your opponent's special summon monsters. Unaffected by card effects. This is a card that Rosalie's deck has literally no answer to, and Tom is playing 2 of them.
So, yeah, because you picked going first in top 4, right?
Yeah, to be fair, that was against Lunalight, which this deck, spoilers, does not have Surgical Striker hand in the side deck. It should, but I did not think of Lunalight, or well, I did, but I didn't think people would actually bring it, so I decided to not play hand. And without that card, if Liger Dancer touches the board, the game ends. Your only out is Linkage into Kagari with 13 spells engraved, which is not happening.
Rosalie is forced to go first because her only way to beat Liger Dancer is to stop it from getting summoned in the first place.
I think Rosalie chose to go first.
Yeah, possibly willingly for the first time this weekend.
Since her deck plays no hand traps in the main, if she goes second like her deck is primarily built for, she is almost guaranteed to lose, so she must go first. She wins the die roll, and in game 1 this plan works. Striker can put up a formidable field, and Rosalie is a monstrous player who deserves to be where she is, and Tom just can't chew through it. However, in Game 2, Tom decides to go first, and it's a completely different story. Even the casters can't pretend this game is not about to be completely one-sided.
All right, Tom's time to start things off.
That is a handful of spells for Rosalie. Could this be the shortest feature match we've had so far this weekend?
Game 2 is about half the length of Game 1. Rosalie gives it her best shot, but 13 spell boosted Kagari off of linkage is not to be, and she resigns midway through resolving her deck's strongest card because Liger Dancer is just that oppressive in this matchup. All this goes to show that the threat certain cards can pose can influence decisions even before the opening hands have been drawn. If we were to create a payoff matrix for Rosalie's decision to go first or second this match, going first might not look all that appealing due to the way that her deck is built, but to Rosalie, going second is hell, and Liger Dancer is Satan. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention that when all the layers of complexity and skill expression have been stripped away, even if you make the correct decision with higher expected value, YuGiOh can be a game of luck. This even applies to players taking the conservative options of their payoff matrix, instead of the greedy line. In the OCG, there is a match famous enough that it has its own wiki page, Seiku Seiku U Arashi, or the MST Heavy Storm Incident. This occurred during the 2012 World Championship Final for Dragon Duel between Yoya Minami of Japan on Inzektor and Yu Hao Liao of Taiwan on Dino Rabbit. In Game 1 of the match, Liao wins the die roll and opts to go first. He sets up a board of Evil Zarlagia in 4 back row, one of which is a Macrocosmos. In 14 years, some things haven't changed much, I guess.
Judge pointing out that Pot of Duality actually is banished instead of going to the graveyard because of Macrocosmos. Macrocosmos, a card that can really cause Inzektors a lot of trouble.
Because Inzektor players needs their Inzektors in the graveyard, right?
That's right.
Inzektor loses to Macro, but it excels going second through the use of Inzektor Hornet to destroy the opponent's cards. Minami's hand contains 2 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon and 1 Heavy Storm. It seems like a strong set of cards against his opponent's field, but it's not clear what the best way to play them is. Any retro player worth their salt would know committing multiple spells and traps to the field is a sign that the player has some counter to Heavy Storm, since not playing around it would be foolish. Instead of trying to bait Logia and rip the Heavy or MST the Macro straight away, Minami decides he is going to use his MSTs to try and destroy his opponent's likely out, Starlight Road. This is definitely a more conservative approach, attempting to play around his opponent's potential responses. He is right to fear Starlight Road, but he gets unlucky. After destroying 2 of Liao's mystery spell traps with MST, the last remaining back row of Starlight Road is flipped up on him to negate the Heavy Storm. With the macro up, Minami has no hope of clawing his way back into this game, and he concedes. He wins Game 2, but is put in a similar position in the 3rd game with fewer tools at his disposal and loses the match. The entire best of 3 takes less than 15 minutes. This match is famous because of this unlucky outcome for Minami, to the point where his iconic grief-stricken pose after losing the match even has ASCII art made out of it. His loss is a tragedy since it comes in spite of the respect he shows for his opponent's disruptions. To Minami, the execution is more valuable to his opponent than the threat here. He is willing to invest his 2 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon to try and resolve Heavy Storm, but he is still thwarted by raw chance. I will defend to the end that YuGiOh is broadly a game of skill, but this match teaches an important lesson. No matter what you decide to play around, no matter how conservative your approach, and no matter how much you throw away out of an abundance of caution, there is always a chance that your play can be thwarted. Though it is crucial to self-reflect on what you can do better after each match, it is also important to recognize and make your peace with what you cannot control. With that, I am out of characters, so I guess this is the end. As I approach 10,000 subscribers, I wanted to sincerely thank you all for your support for my channel. It really means a lot to me. I never thought I would get even this far. As always, thanks to Dan Parker for editing my script, and Low Fat Ham for helping me recreate some of the games you saw in this video. Also, a massive thanks to my patrons, including Dan Parker, Drumstep, Farfa, Megaru00, MBT YuGiOh, Prinrin, Ray, RobTickBot, and Steven Marmerstein. Support on Patreon is what makes putting together videos like this much more justifiable for me, so if you want to help my work beyond just a like or subscription, you know where to go. Be well, until next time.
Good content. What good content do we have on the internet? Well, it's not going to come from the Farfa channel. Out of Characters, make sure you subscribe to the original content creator.